crunch of gravel under the tires of Alan's sedan was the only sound to break the suburban quiet of the late afternoon. He was making a detour, a spontaneous decision to visit his daughter, Brianna, and her husband, Dan, on his way home from a long day at a construction site. A smile touched his lips as he imagined their surprise. But as he pulled into the driveway, the smile vanished, replaced by a cold knot of unease in his stomach. Parked near the front gate was his wife Margaret's silver Lexus, gleaming under the fading sun. It should have been in their garage, miles away. A premonition, sharp and unwelcome, seized him. He killed the engine and approached the house on foot, his work boots silent on the soft lawn. Through a half-open window, he heard voices, his wife's light and musical, and his son-in-law's crisp and professional. What he heard next stopped his heart. "When the old fool finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned for," Margaret said, her tone laced with a chilling avarice he had never heard before. Alan flattened himself against the brick wall, his breath caught in his throat. He was listening to his wife of 25 years and his daughter's husband meticulously plot his financial execution. "The timeline is perfect," Dan elaborated, his lawyer's voice devoid of any emotion. "We file in June, claim irreconcilable differences. With the new state statutes, Margaret's entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage, plus spousal support for life." Margaret let out a tinkling laugh, a sound that had once been the soundtrack to Alan's happiness. "The construction business alone is worth $12 million, she mused. "Add the rental properties, the vacation home, the investments. We're looking at nearly $20 million total." Alan's hands, calloused from decades of hard work, trembled as he reached for his phone. He fumbled with the screen, his fingers thick and clumsy, and pressed record. He needed proof. He needed to capture this monstrous reality. "The beautiful part is his trusting nature," Dan continued, his voice dripping with contempt. "Alan has no idea we've been documenting his assets for months. Bank statements, property deeds, business valuations. I've copied everything." 2 years of playing the devoted wife, Margaret added, her voice smug, pretending to care about his boring construction stories, nodding sympathetically when he worried about payroll. "God, the man actually believes I love him." That sentence was a physical blow. It knocked the air from Alan's lungs and left him gasping in the shadows. He stayed hidden, his phone silently recording every venomous word until they moved away from the window. He crept back to his car, his world shattered. 25 years of shared memories, of building a life and a family, had all been a performance. A long, elaborate con. He drove home in a daze, Margaret's cruel words echoing in his mind. That evening, when Margaret returned, she was the picture of the loving wife, asking about his day and complaining about traffic. Alan played his part, the trusting husband, while a cold, hard resolve began to form where his heart used to be. They thought he was a fool. They thought they were playing chess with a checkers player. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The next morning, Alan's war began. He didn't hire a lawyer, not yet. He started with a call to Marcus Webb, his accountant and old friend, the only person who knew the true, complex architecture of his finances. He explained the situation, his voice calm and steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside. Marcus listened, and by the end of the call, the first defensive walls were being erected. Over the next 48 hours, Alan, with Marcus's expert guidance, began moving the bulk of his liquid assets and diversifying ownership of key properties through a series of offshore trusts and holding companies he'd set up years ago for tax purposes. It was all perfectly legal, but it made the visible part of his kingdom, the part Dan had been so diligently documenting, a mere fraction of his actual worth. He then moved to the second phase of his plan. He walked into his longtime bank and sat down with the president, a man he played golf with. He reported a series of suspicious inquiries on their accounts and requested an immediate top-level security freeze on every joint asset. "I want everything locked down, Tom," Alan said, his face a mask of concern. "Every joint account, every credit line. Nothing moves without in-person, dual-signature verification." The first domino fell 2 days later. Margaret was at lunch at the Riverside Country Club with her friends, holding court as she usually did. When the bill came, her card was declined. Flustered and embarrassed, she tried another, declined. Her panicked call reached Alan as he was reviewing blueprints. "Alan, something is terribly wrong with our accounts," she cried, her voice a pitch higher than usual. "My cards were declined in front of everyone. The bank said there's a security hold." "A security hold? That sounds serious," Alan replied, injecting the perfect amount of surprise into his tone. "Don't worry, honey. I'll call the bank right away and get to the bottom of this." He hung up and went back to his work. The pressure mounted. Margaret found herself without access to the river of money she had taken for granted her entire adult life. Dan, attempting to move funds from a joint savings account they had secretly opened, also hit the wall of Alan's security freeze. Their confidence began to fray, replaced by a growing paranoia. He had to know. Their desperation led them to escalate their strategy. A simple, profitable divorce was no longer enough. They needed to force his hand. Dan advised Margaret that their best move was to paint Alan as an abuser. "We filed for an emergency restraining order," Dan explained in a hushed phone call Alan's private investigator recorded. "We claim he's using financial control to abuse you. The frozen accounts are our proof. The plan's most sinister element was to weaponize their own daughter." Margaret arranged to meet Brianna for coffee, her face etched with worry and fear. "I'm so worried about your father," Margaret began, her voice trembling. "He's become so controlling, paranoid. He's cut me off from our money to punish me. As a psychologist, I thought you might see the signs. A mental breakdown, perhaps." But Brianna, trained to detect manipulation and inconsistencies, was not so easily swayed. The story didn't fit the father she knew. "Mom, this doesn't sound like Dad," she said carefully. "Financial disagreements happen." What triggered this? The clinical nature of her daughter's response infuriated Margaret, whose attempts to elicit sympathy were met with analytical questions. Sensing a wall with her mother, Brianna went to the one person who could give her a straight answer. She found her father in his home office, surrounded by paperwork. Dad," she said, closing the door behind her. "Mom told me you froze the accounts. She said you're trying to control her. What is going on?" Alan looked at his daughter, his heart aching. He had wanted to shield her from this ugliness, but they had dragged her into the center of it. He knew he had to trust her with the truth. Without a word, he unlocked his phone and played the recording from that fateful afternoon. Brianna listened, her face growing paler with every word. She heard her mother's greed, her husband's cold calculations, and their shared casual cruelty. The betrayal was a double blow, a poison that seeped into the very foundations of her life. When the recording finished, tears were silently streaming down her face. She looked at her father, her expression a mixture of devastation and fierce resolve. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she whispered. "What do you need me to do?" "I just need you to know the truth," Alan said softly. The court hearing for the restraining order was their final, desperate gamble. Margaret took the stand, a picture of a terrified, battered wife. She recounted a fabricated tale of Alan's escalating anger and financial tyranny, her voice cracking as she described the humiliation of having her cards declined. It was a masterful performance. Then it was Alan's turn. His lawyer, a stoic man named James Morrison, rose. "Your Honor," he began, "we are not here today to debate marital finances. We are here because the court is being used to perpetrate a fraud." He looked at Margaret. "A fraud planned by the petitioner and her co-conspirator, Mr. Daniel Thompson." A murmur went through the courtroom. Dan, sitting behind Margaret, stiffened. "We have evidence of this conspiracy," James continued. "A 43-minute audio recording in which Mrs. Cole and Mr. Thompson detail their entire plan to defraud my client of his assets." He connected a phone to the court's audio system. The courtroom fell silent, and then Margaret's voice filled the air. "When the old fool finally signs the papers—" The judge listened intently, her expression hardening with every passing minute. She heard the discussion of asset division, the mockery of Alan's love, the cold-blooded strategy. The recording was damning, irrefutable proof that Margaret was not a victim, but a predator. When it was over, the judge stared down at Margaret, her eyes filled with contempt. "Mrs. Cole," she said, her voice like ice, "your petition is dismissed with prejudice, and I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for a full investigation into perjury and conspiracy to commit fraud." The gavel fell like a death knell on Margaret's and Dan's future. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Dan was disbarred for his actions and faced multiple lawsuits from other clients Alan's investigator had uncovered. Brianna filed for divorce the next day. The divorce settlement left Margaret with almost nothing, her claims invalidated by her own recorded words. She went from a life of country clubs and designer handbags to working in a department store. Alan, now free, stood stronger than before, his business and his integrity intact. He had walked through the fire of betrayal and emerged not burned, but forged anew.